I'm Rosemary Bartlett with the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webcast, Exterior Lighting Requirements in COMcheck, brought to you by the U.S. Department of Energy's Building Energy Codes program. We're very happy to have as our speakers today Eric Richman and Pam Cole of the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. Welcome, Eric. Please begin.
Thank you. I'd like to start with some of the basic requirements of why we actually have an energy code, which is why we're here today talking about the exterior lighting requirements. As some of you may know, there was an Energy Conservation and Production Act, which was developed a while ago through the federal system, which has been amended at least a couple of times by EPACT, and there is a provision in that document that requires states adopt a commercial energy code. And this is what drives, of course, state adoption, which is why we're having to deal with energy codes across the country. There was a part of this that DOE was responsible for, which was determining what the effective stringency level was of the code that needed to be adopted. And currently, as DOE has determined it, the current level is the ASHRAE IESNA 90.1-1999 standard. So states are required at this point to work on adopting a code that is at least as stringent as that particular standard. Many code and standard versions are available. IECC develops codes, ASHRAE IESNA develops codes, states develop their own. So there are lots of codes and standards out there, various versions that are being adopted by states. So unfortunately, not every state has the same code. It makes it a little more complicated. As you'll see, if you look around at information on state adoption, some states have adopted nationally available codes, such as the IECC and ASHRAE IESNA 90.1. Some states have developed their own specific codes, some of which are based on these national codes, some of which are built from the ground up. And some states still have not decided on or adopted a code at this point. Most of them are still working on it to try and comply with the EPACT provisions. At this point, let's move into the basic lighting requirements, which is what we're going to talk about here today. As you can see, there are three basic parts to the lighting requirements in most of the energy standards. There are mandatory requirements, interior lighting power limits, and exterior lighting power limits. Of course, today we're talking about the exterior provisions. So there are mandatory exterior requirements which have to do with controls, switching requirements, and efficiency of sources. There are also exterior lighting power limits, and there are exemptions to these limits. There's also, as you can see from this graphic, a couple of different types, tradable and non-tradable, and we'll go over those in detail, what the differences are and how they apply. The basic rule for exterior lighting power limits is that the total connected power you are using for your design must be less than or equal to the exterior lighting power that you're allowed from the standard. That's the basic requirement. So we're going to talk about both the mandatory requirements and these exterior lighting power limits. One thing to note is that even though there's an expanded set of requirements in this current standards, the 2004 ASHRAE and 2006 IECC, most earlier versions of the standards did have some exterior requirements, but they were small and fairly limited, and so there wasn't much needed to be talked about. So let's move into mandatory requirements. The basic mandatory requirement is for controls, and this is a requirement that for dusk to dawn lighting, you must have a photocell control, or for other kind of exterior lighting, you need to have some form of a 7-day seasonal programmable clock-type system with astronomic correction and a 4-hour battery backup. And this will keep pace with time changes throughout the year to make sure that lights are turned off when they need to be. There are exceptions to this. If you have covered vehicle entrances or an exit from a building or a parking structure where there is a need for eye adaptation changes or concerns or consistency because of security or eye adaptation concerns, then there is an exemption. And of course, the intent of these requirements are to make sure that lighting is not left on during the day when it's not needed. There's another mandatory requirement for lamp efficacy, and this basically is saying that if you have any building grounds luminaires with sources of 100 watts or greater, they must have a source efficacy of at least 60 lumens per watt. Now what this means is that any luminaire you have, again, with a lamp that's rated over 100 watts, you're not going to be able to use simple incandescent or halogen sources. They simply won't meet the efficacy requirement. Some compact fluorescents will work, but some of the earlier versions or less efficient versions will not comply with this requirement either. However, most linear fluorescent, most metal halide, and other HID sources will be efficient enough as sources to comply here. Now, again, this is for building grounds lighting, and it's only for luminaires over 100 watts. So if you have smaller sources, say a 50-watt lamp, this requirement doesn't apply. Also, if you have non-building grounds, so for example, a lamp over a doorway, which is not actually building grounds, it's attached to the structure, but it is exterior, would also not have to comply with this. There are exceptions to this requirement if your light is controlled by a motion sensor, or if it is included in any of the exterior lighting allowance exceptions that we'll cover later, or if it's as part of a lighting system for historical safety signage or emergency considerations, then again, this requirement does not have to be complied with. And those two are basically the only requirements in the mandatory section for exterior lighting. So let's move on to the major portion, which are the exterior lighting power limits. And again, the simple requirement is that your total connected power must be less than or equal to the lighting power allowance. And it's a very simple three-step process. You calculate what your proposed connected lighting power is. This is your designed exterior lighting, and again, this is lighting that's associated with the building, fed through the building service. There are exemptions to this, and we'll go over those in detail. You want to make sure that you don't count exempted lighting, because it's just going to make it harder for you to comply with the actual code. The second step is to calculate what you're actually allowed, and this comes directly from the standard or code itself. There are lighting power densities similar to the way you do interior lighting compliance. For interior lighting, you have lighting power densities per space type. For exterior lighting, you have lighting power densities per exterior function or area or application. The other difference between interior and exterior is for exterior, you do have an additional unrestricted 5% allowance of the total that you can use for anything, any exterior lighting application you need. And this is there specifically to apply some flexibility and to realize that not everything can be covered by a standard. There's always going to be something extra that maybe you need wattage for, and this 5% will allow you to apply it there. The third part of this process, of course, is to compare the two, your connected power with your allowance, and make sure that you are at or below that allowance for compliance. Let's look at those exceptions, because one of the first things you're going to want to do is calculate your actual installed power, and you want to make sure that none of these exemptions are included there. You want to make sure you eliminate those. One of them is for specialized signal or marker lighting, directional type lighting. If this is associated with transportation, signage for safety, directing transportation, that is exempted. You don't have to count that. If you have lighting that is integral to signage, either advertising signage or directional signage, if it's a part of that sign, not shining or illuminating that sign, but actually part of it, it is also exempted. In a similar fashion, if there's lighting that's actually a part of equipment or instrumentation, and it's part of the manufacture of that product, installed by the manufacturer, such as these two examples, you have lighted beverage machines or a lighted gas pump, the lights in those equipment are not, do not have to be part of the compliance. Another category would be lighting for theatrical purposes. This would include performance, stage, film production, etc. These would be the lights that are actually used for the performance or used for the video production or used for the filming. If you have general illumination in hallways, offices, for example, or audience seating, those kind of things, those do have to comply with the requirements of the code. But if it's there for the theatrical production, those can be exempted. Another category would be lighting for athletic playing areas. And again, if you have lighting in the general areas for the audience, offices, hallways, all that other kind of stuff, that is part of the code requirement. But if it is there just to illuminate the playing field surface, that can be exempted. Another category would be lighting for industrial production. If it's an industrial exterior process and the lighting is there to support that process, that can be exempted. Once again, if it's general illumination for parking or other non-industrial production activities, that must be accounted for, but not the lighting that actually supports the industrial production. And of course, all of these exempted lighting requirements must be separately controlled. That's part of the requirement as well, to make sure that it isn't included in the general illumination. A couple of final exempted items: theme elements in theme amusement parks. And once again, to confirm, this is not the general lighting for parking lots or any other general applications. This is only the theme element portions, the part that gives the sparkle to the activity. Similarly, if you have lighting that highlights a public monument or a registered historic landmark, that lighting that performs that function can be exempted as well. That covers the exemptions. So once you've calculated what your total connected design power is, then you want to find out what your allowance is. And this comes from the table of allowances in the standard or code. The important thing, one of the important items here for exterior is that it's divided into two separate categories: tradable versus non-tradable. Tradable categories are generally the more common applications, and these are allowed to be traded. In other words, if you don't use the power in one section, you can apply it to another. A specific example might be if you have a certain amount of wattage allowed for a parking lot, but you don't need all of it for the parking lot, you can then apply it to some other application, such as a canopy, where you don't think you have enough lighting according to what the table allows. That's the tradable function, and there are a lot of applications where this is tradable. We'll show you what each of those are. The second category, non-tradable. These are less common applications. These tend to have either a security or a specific task illumination requirement, and these are applications where you have a use it or lose it allowance. In other words, you're given a certain amount of wattage for an application. You can use up to that amount, but you can't use any more, and you can't trade any of this wattage between other non-tradable or tradable applications. It's truly use it or lose it for that application. So let's look more specifically at each of these lighting power density limits. We'll start with the tradable section with each of the tradable activity areas. The big one, of course, will be parking lots. This is done on a square footage basis. You have currently a 0.15 watt per square foot value. Add up the square footage of all your parking lots and drives and apply that value to it. Under building grounds, you have several applications. Walkways are covered in two different types: either a walkway that's less than 10 feet wide, in which case you calculate the allowance on a linear footage, linear feet of walkway at 1 watt per linear foot. If you have wider walkways, wider than 10 foot, then you do the application on a square footage basis, 0.2 watts per square foot. This would also apply to any plaza type areas or special feature areas. A third category under building grounds would be stairways, and again, these are exterior stairwells, and these are based on the square footage basis, 1 watt per square foot. A note here about covered parking and interior stairways. If you do have covered parking or an interior stairwell, those are included in the interior lighting power compliance. This table would only be used for uncovered parking areas or for exterior stairways. One final note on this page, under walkways 10 foot wide or greater, plaza areas, and special feature areas. Special feature areas covers any other type of applications you may not find on the table. If you have a special application that needs some lighting that isn't covered elsewhere, this is where this would come from. Let's look at some more tradable applications. We have entrances and exits. Main entries are again based on the linear footage allowance, the linear footage of the door width. And main entries is just what it says. It's the main entry into the building. It's generally where customers would enter, where the public would enter. Anything else that would include exits, say in the back or the side of the building, or employee entrances, storage access, delivery access, etc., those would all be considered other doors. Main entries are simply that, the main entry, typically where the public or customers would enter. Canopies and overhangs is another tradable application, and this includes both freestanding and attached. So if you have a gas station freestanding canopy, that's included here. If you have a canopy on the side of a restaurant that maybe has some signage or covers a sidewalk, that would be included here as well. And again, these are all based on a watts per square foot basis. You calculate the square footage of the area underneath the canopy and apply 1.25 watts for each of those square feet. Another tradable category is outdoor sales. And in this case, you have two different applications, both of which can be applied to the same area. The first one is the open area allowance. This is for any kind of sales area, including vehicle sales. You calculate the square footage of that sales lot, and you get 0.5 watts for each square foot. In addition to that, if you have street frontage, say in a vehicle sales lot, and one side of that lot faces a busy street where you're advertising the goods, you are allowed an additional 20 watts per linear foot of that street frontage. And this is added to any watts per square foot allowance you get in the line above. So it's important to keep in mind that both of those are added together. It's not either or. That covers it for the tradable applications. Now let's look at non-tradable applications or non-tradable surfaces. These again are ones where you have a use it or lose it allowance. You can use up to that amount of wattage for that application, but it cannot be traded anywhere else. The first one in this category are building facades, and in this case there are two methods of calculation. Now, unlike the outdoor sales where you had two applications and you could use both of them together, this provides two methods of calculating it, but you can only use one method or the other for each applicable surface. So for example, if you had a building facade you were lighting on the north and on the south, on the north you might decide you want to do it on a watts per square foot basis. Calculate the square footage of area you're illuminating and apply 0.2 watts per each of those square feet. Perhaps on the south you're doing it a little bit differently, and it's easier to calculate based on the linear length of the base of that wall. In that case, you would apply 5 watts per linear foot of the base of that illuminated surface. So again, two ways to calculate, but you can only use one method or the other for each particular surface. Another non-tradable application, automated teller machines and night depositories. In this case, you're allowed 270 watts per location, plus an additional 90 watts for each additional machine. The way this works is, again, if you have a north and a south application, if you have an ATM location on the north and it has one ATM machine, you get 270 watts for that. If you had an ATM location on the south side of the building that had two machines, you would get 270 watts for the first machine, plus an additional 90 watts for that second machine. Now, later on, when you see how this works in a software application, you'll see a 180 watt base applied, and that's simply because the math is easier. You apply 180 watts and then 90 for each machine. But I just want to let you know you'll see a little bit of a difference. It comes out to be the same. Another application in non-tradable, entrances and gatehouse inspection stations. And again, these are uncovered inspection stations. And this is on a square footage basis, 1.25 watts per square foot of uncovered area. And a note here to make sure that if you have covered areas, such as a canopy over a guard station, that will be covered in the canopy section, not in this section. Next, a few other non-tradable surfaces. We have loading areas for law enforcement, fire, ambulance, etc. Again, it's wattage on square footage basis. You calculate the square footage of that area and apply 0.5 watts per square foot. And again, this is uncovered area. If it does have a canopy, it would be covered in the tradable section of the canopies. Another non-tradable application are drive-up windows at fast food restaurants. Now, even though this says fast food restaurant, it would apply to any other drive-up window as well, such as a pharmacy or a bank. And in this case, it's a flat allowance of 400 watts per drive-through. So again, if you had a drive-through on the north and the south part of the building, you'd get 400 watts for each of those. There may be some applications where you have two drive-up windows on the same side of the building. If they're separate drive-up locations, then you would get 400 watts for each of those. A final non-tradable application is parking near 24-hour retail entrances. In this case, it's an eye adaptation issue. A lot of times, if you're leaving a brightly lit store into a dark parking lot, your eye needs to adapt. So there's an allowance given there for that front area. And it's, again, a flat 800 watts per main entry. Typically, there will be just one of these per building, but if you do have two main entries, you could get 800 watts per each entry. That completes the non-tradable surfaces. Again, these are all the allowances you have. You would add up all of your allowance, compare that to your design wattage, and hopefully your design wattage is less than or equal to. Now, what happens if your design does not comply? There are several things you can do and should do. First, check your calculations. Make sure that you've picked the appropriate exterior applications. You may have chosen the wrong value and you're not getting as much wattage as you should be allowed. Look at the actual lighting equipment wattages that you are using. As you'll see in the software, there are some defaults you can apply, but those will tend to be conservative. You want to make sure you've got the actual lighting equipment wattage from the manufacturer to make sure you aren't overcounting something. Also, look at the applicable exemptions. Make sure that you've taken all of those that you're allowed. You don't want to have to be counting something that wasn't meant to be part of the code to begin with. If none of those work, then and even if those do, you still want to look at your design. But if those don't work, take a look at your design. Make sure first that you've applied reasonable illuminance levels. If your space is being overlit, then of course you're going to be using more wattage than you need, and you won't be able to comply. Also look at the light sources. If you think you're using the reasonable illuminance, perhaps your light sources are less efficient than they could be, and this would help reduce the amount of wattage you need. Thank you.
Thanks for explaining the requirements for us, Eric. Now we're going to shift to Pam Cole, also of Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, to demonstrate how to use COMcheck to show compliance for exterior lighting. Pam?
Thank you. Before we get into the software, I want to go over the suite of COMcheck tools. So when you go out to the website at energycodes.gov, you'll know where to go and what to grab if you're doing your exterior lighting. First off, the prescriptive approach. We do have a tool out there called the COMcheck Package Generator. This is where you can define, or you can actually get some packages for the envelope, pick from a package, and do your envelope compliance. It does not have exterior lighting in the COMcheck Package Generator. The desktop version over to the right, the trade-off version, COMcheck, has the exterior lighting option in it. There is a Mac version that will be available soon. And so if you are a Mac user, go back out to the website within a couple months and see if that Mac version will have the exterior lighting. It doesn't right now. We're working on it. The web tool, COMcheck Web, same as the desktop version, but again, we are currently working on getting that exterior lighting feature in the COMcheck Web tool, so periodically go out to the website and look for these new features. So currently right now you'd have to download the desktop Windows version to get this exterior lighting feature. Now when you download the desktop version, the first time you open it, you're going to see that it will actually be a screenshot that I'm showing you here with the loading bar that will appear, and it's going to go back and forth and load the actual desktop application. This is a standalone application, so you will open it from your Start Programs, or if you have a shortcut from the desktop, you would open it that way. Now a couple of screenshots. For the exterior lighting feature, there's only two codes that will have this feature available, and that is ASHRAE 90.1-2004 and the IECC 2006. If you choose from another code, or you're dealing with another code, you're going to see you're not going to have this feature available. It's only for these two applicable codes. And this is the code menu, and we have a lot of codes you can choose from within this software application. So make yourself familiar that it is only for 90.1-2004 and the 2006 IECC. When you choose between these two codes, and don't jump back and forth in between them, as I highly suggest that, but if you are on one, you're going to see a couple new things that will appear on some of the screens. There is a new lighting tab. Now we have defined interior and exterior. So you would see the exterior lighting tab if you're on the 90.1 or 2006. What you'll also see is there's always the building use, which is for interior. And that's also, you have to define your building use type if you're doing your envelope and mechanical. But now it's optional. If you're only doing exterior lighting, then you don't need to define the building use. You're only going to be working in this area down here and defining all your exterior lighting applications. The other thing that it will be new that you will see is that we have envelope compliance, we have interior lighting compliance, but now there'll be another tab down in the right-hand bottom section that will be for exterior lighting. These say TBD because the screenshot, I don't have anything in there, so it's saying it doesn't have information to give me a calculation yet. And lastly, another screenshot that is populated is down in the right-hand bottom corner, exterior lighting areas, this is where you can add as many applications as you have. And there's a scroll bar, so if you keep adding, you can have a scroll bar that can help you as far as going down to define all your exterior lighting applications, which will then, when you do that, they will automatically be populated over into that exterior lighting tab. So here is the grid, a screenshot of a grid of I've populated my applications in the project tab, and now when I go to click on exterior lighting, all of them will appear. I have to highlight on which one I want to start running my lighting schedule into. So the one that you're highlighted on, and you start defining your luminaires, that's where it's going to drop it into. And this is a screenshot of now I've added some luminaires into each one of these applications, and I'm going to show you this live, that I have some in there, and now it's running some calculations for compliance for me. And it also will tell you for each application what the total allowed wattage is, and it'll start calculating what you're proposing that wattage is for that application. And again, keep in mind, non-tradable cannot be traded for your tradable areas. It stands alone and has to pass by itself. But the other thing that the software does that you won't see visually is that 5% unrestricted allowance. So in this demo I'm going to show you, the overall allowed, the non-tradable was not meeting it. And so the software will take this 5% and it will add it. And the first thing it's going to look at in your lighting schedule is non-tradable. Do you have any non-tradable applications? And is that non-tradable application, is your proposed wattage way higher than the allowed? It's going to take that 5% and it's going to throw it right towards your non-tradable. And in this case, in the example, the non-tradable was not passing, and so it's calculating the overall 5% unrestricted allowance, and it's taken the 163, or if you round it up to 164 watts, and throwing it to the non-tradable first. Then it will go look at if there's any additional. When it throws it over to the non-tradable, it's going to throw the additional unrestricted allowance to any of your tradables. That if you're not meeting by trading off in between your other applications, it's going to throw that additional unrestricted over there and try to calculate compliance. And with this example, I now have green down here in the right-hand bottom corner for exterior lighting, that this one's passing by 0%. So let's jump over to the actual software itself. And I'm going to give it a second here because I'm actually sharing applications, and sometimes it takes a little bit of time for it to load so you can see it on your screen. I'm in the desktop software, and I'm going to play around with it. But if you can't see this, again, as Rose had mentioned, enlarge your screen to its full capacity so you can see some of these things that I'll be playing around with. So first off, a couple of basic things to keep in mind. Up here in the title bar is I have the code. This is the defaulted code that I've chosen from that shows 90.1. Now when you choose a code every time in the software, when you close your software and you open it up again, that same code will be on each time. So if you're dealing with codes in between different states, you'll always want to keep in mind to look up here in the blue bar to know what code that it's currently on. In this one it says untitled.cck. I don't have a data file that I've opened yet, so it'll say untitled. The .cck is actually just the extension of this data file. So when you start saving them, your data files, you're going to see they're going to have that .cck extension. And then again, this tells you what version I'm working with, 3.5.1. This is the most current version available for download out on energycodes.gov. So let's take a look. I'm in the Project tab, and I have my state and location. I'm calling my project type New Construction. Now, another thing to mention here is I have choices between new construction and addition and alterations. Currently in the software, if you are doing exterior lighting that deals with an existing building and you're doing an alteration to that exterior lighting, do not click on alterations. It has a little pop-up that will give you some little easy things to tell you about when you're doing your alterations, because it is a different type of application. But when I clicked on alterations, now down in the right-hand corner, you're not going to see that exterior lighting application option anymore. We're working on that. We're going to have this feature available for alterations. So right now, when you're working with an alteration that has to do with exterior lighting, you need to choose New Construction. Down in the left-hand corner, you have Edit Project Details. This is where I can click on the Edit Project Details, and I can go in and put in my permit number, the address of the location, the designer, and so forth. And anything I put in this section here is going to show up on my report. Again, the building use type, if I'm not doing interior envelope, interior lighting, or mechanical, I don't need to define my building use type. I'm only working with my exterior lighting. So let's go take a look at some of these exterior lighting applications, because some of them are a little unique. So I'm going to click down here where it says click your select your area type. Now this comes from the list from 90.1. So let's take a look at the ATMs. I'm going to define an ATM here, and let's say I have 2. Now when I'm saying 2, I'm saying I have 2 on the north side of the building. With that, I need to be paying attention to, I have quantity, I have a column for units, I have a column for watts per unit, and is it tradable or non-tradable? And I'm scrolling with this scroll bar down here to move over to make sure I'm seeing everything that's applicable when I start adding in my applications. I can also move some of these things around by taking my arrow here and grabbing a hold of that grid and moving things. So I'm making sure that I'm seeing everything that I need to, especially when it deals with some of these other units. But let's stay with the ATM. I've now defined the north side with 2 ATM machines. And now let's go in and click on Add and add another ATM that sits on the south side of the building. And I'm going to say that there's only one on the south side. The software is going to calculate, as Eric mentioned before, and let me click on the exterior lighting tab because it's automatically populated those applications, that it's going to calculate if you're saying 2 machines that sit on the one side of the building, then it's giving you that additional 90. So it's taking the 270 that you're allowed plus that 90. So you're saying that what's allowed for on this side of the building, you have 360 to work with. Non-tradable, use it or lose it. On the other side of the building, where I'm showing I only have 1 machine, then you are getting that minimum allowed, which is 270. So let's jump back over to the project, and let's look at some other things that are unique. I clicked on Add, and I'm going to click on the drop-down arrow, and now let's go to Building Facade. You have 2 options for your building facade. So let's say on the north side, I'm going to be able to choose from either one of these, not both. I have to determine on the north side of my building, am I going to calculate the wall or surface area to define my luminaires, or am I going to calculate the length at the base of the wall? So you have an option here. You can't do both. However, if I'm doing the north and south side, then I'm going to define those separately. So I would have 2 applications in my lighting grid that I'd be working with. And you still have the option to choose from which one that you want to use. Another unique, I would say, application is outdoor cells. So if I have an outdoor cells parking lot, and again your units, be looking at your units because it's telling me square footage here. So now I'm going to enter square footage of my parking lot area. Again though, with your outdoor cells, I'm going to click on Add, and with outdoor cells only, I can add in that cells lot street frontage if I have street frontage. And this again, I've added it in, and I'm looking, I got my quantity, but look at my units. I need to be paying careful attention here because my units now is not in square footage, it's in linear feet. So now I'm calculating the linear feet of the street frontage to calculate that out. Now you can do this for your outdoor cells. So when I do that, and let's say it's 500 linear feet, I'm going to jump back over to exterior lighting, and I can start defining my lighting schedule for the outdoor cells area and my lighting for that just street frontage area. But I want to make sure that I add that street frontage in because I get that when I have outdoor cells. Let's jump back over to the project, and now I'm going to actually open up an existing example data file for exterior lighting. So I'm going to come up here and go File and Open Recent, and I have my data file saved. And it'll ask me, anything I've done here, do I want to save it? And I'm going to say, no, I don't want to save any of this. So now I have this file opened, and you'll see at the top that it's telling me the data file name with that .cc extension and the version and so forth, and this is the code that I have on for the saved data file. Another thing to look for is look for anything in red, but you'll see that in the building use it does say click to select a category, and it's in red, but it's optional because all I'm doing is my exterior lighting, so I don't need to pay attention to it. With this one in project details, over to the left, I have put in title, site, permit. I've put some information here. This is what I want to show up on my report. And now I've added in some examples of some different applications that we're going to play around with. I have a drive-up window, and I'm showing a quantity of 2. So if I scroll with my scroll bar over here, I'm looking at my units. And you can move these things around because depending on the application, some of these get pretty big, and you want to make sure you're defining them right. So now I'm taking it and I'm just going to expand the units column. So with looking at that, I have a drive-up, and I'm doing it by quantity of the windows, of the actual drive-up itself. Main entry, again, I'm looking at quantity, but I have a main entry, and how am I defining that? It's the width of the door. So now I've calculated the width of the door for that main entry area that I want to define my lighting to. Parking area. Looking at units, it's total square footage. This isn't the outdoor cells, but this is a parking area, so I can't do street frontage with my parking area because it's not outdoor cells. So I've put in my total square footage. And now with walkway. With the walkway, I'm defining this example. It's a walkway that's less than 10 feet. Now with that, if it was greater than 10 feet, your units are different, so pay attention. Because with the walkway that's less than 10 feet, I need to define the length of the walkway. So linear feet, I have a 100-foot length walkway. If I was to define a walkway that was greater than 10 feet, you will see then it's going to tell you that you need to do that in the depth or the width of the walkway. And that's how you would define it if it's greater than 10 feet. So let's jump over to the exterior lighting tab and take a look. This is basically the same screenshot that I showed you in the presentation. I have my drive-up window, and I've defined some metal halides and the overall fixture wattage. So I'm looking at the non-tradable here, and I have allowed 800, proposed 960. So my proposed is way higher than what's allowed at this point. And non-tradable is a use or lose it. My main entrance, I've defined some compact fluorescence, and I also, again, have my fixture wattage 42. The parking areas, again, defining it high pressure sodium, and my proposed here is 2200, my allowed is 2250, so I'm actually under. The same with my main entrance. My proposed is 84, my allowed is 120, I'm under on that too. Again, keep in mind, any of these tradable areas, you can trade in between those two, and the software is going to calculate it as such. You don't see it, but if you pay attention to, if you didn't have any non-tradables, you can see how you can play around with those because it's going to calculate overall down in the bottom for exterior lighting. It's looking at your overall proposed against your overall tradable allowed, overall proposed for non-tradable versus your proposed for or allowed for non-tradable areas. Then down in here on the walkway, again, my proposed is 99 and my allowed is 100, so I'm looking pretty good for my tradable. And so with that, why down here in the right-hand corner does my exterior lighting say I'm passing? Because I know I'm passing by my tradable because I'm under on each one of these applications. And my non-tradable is not. This is where I talked about that 5% unrestricted allowance. You don't automatically see it. I'm going to show you the report that actually shows that the software is calculated into your report, and it does define it on your report. But what it's doing here is it's taking that 5%, and the first thing that it will apply it to is that non-tradable. So it took the non-tradable, and it took that 5% and added it. And with this example, by adding in that allowance, this lighting example now passes. In some cases it might not, but that's where that 5% goes first. It goes to a non-tradable. If you did not have a non-tradable application, then it will throw that 5% into your tradable areas. That's if you're not passing. So it's going to take that 5% and then throw it over to tradables. No matter where it is, it looks at the total that you have proposed. That's what it's going to calculate it to. So let's say with this example that I've looked at my lighting schedule and I forgot to add in some additional lighting that was by that walkway. So I'm going to come up here, and I got my lighting, my walkway highlighted because it depends on the row that you have highlighted where it's going to throw it in. And let me add in some metal halide, 50 watt. Let's say it's magnetic. I'm going to say 1 lamp per fixture. Let's say it's 2 number of fixtures that I have for this special area by the walkway. Now I'm over to the fixture wattage, and I don't have the manufacturer specifications for this one. In the program, if you are in that actual column and you have your cursor there and you right-click with your mouse, you can select defaults. What the default is, and even when you're looking at defining your fixture wattage from your specs, it has to be the lamp plus the ballast. So these defaults you can use, and I've used that one here because I didn't have the specifications for it. Now let's take a look. Now that I've added in this special lighting, my compliance down at the bottom, my exterior lighting says now I'm failing. It's failing even with that 5% because I was barely meeting compliance with that 5%. Now I've added in some more and I'm failing. So now what? So I take a look at my lighting schedule and I'm going, well, this is special lighting. How do I get my allowance or my exemption for this special lighting? I know in the code there's some exemptions for special lighting. So if you come up to the Options menu where it says File, Edit, View, and I click on Options, I want to define some exemptions for my exterior lighting. So I click it. This gives you an additional column in your lighting grid. And down below with the little scroll bar, I can scroll over because if you start getting a lot of information here, you don't want to miss something that could be applicable. The other thing I can do besides scrolling with the scroll bar, I showed you this on the Project tab, I can come up here and grab this column. Maybe I want to condense my components a little bit so I can see all this a little bit better, and I can move that over. So I can move my little columns over, kind of like an Excel spreadsheet, so to speak. But now I have this new column for exemptions. And when it displays this, it's going to do it for every application. Does not mean you have an exemption for every application, but we just happen to have one for this walkway. So I click on the little arrow, and now I'm looking at what are my exemptions that come from the code. And it just happens to be that this special lighting by the walkway was highlighting a public monument. So I'm going to choose that. And when I chose that, since this was a full exemption, I'm now back to look at my compliance down at the bottom. My exterior lighting is back to 0 because the ones that I just put in, they're all exempt. So it went back to 0 compliance because now I'm meeting compliance with that. So what if I had some areas in the software that I had some questions on? Maybe I wasn't sure about this public monument. Really, is that what I have for an exemption? Maybe I still have some questions about how something needs to be entered. Up in the Help section is the entire Software User's Guide. I'm not going to open it and show it to you, but if you go into this application and you go into Help Topics, there's a whole section now that's just for exterior lighting. It has definitions for some of the features. It has definitions for the actual applications. And it has detailed information on how to do your inputs. It also has applicable information for the rest of the software, but for exterior lighting, there's a special section now just for exterior lighting. So let's go take a look at the actual report. And I'm going to go share another application, so I'm going to do this a little slow so it comes up on your screen. And I'm going to click on the report. And I'm going to give it a second here so you can see it up on your screen. All right. This is an actual report from that example file. Now, with that, I'm going to jump back over to the software and show you how to file, save, and so forth, and how you get this report. This one's in a PDF format. You have the option to put it into a different format. That option is typically available for CAD users that want to take that actual report and incorporate it or import it into their CAD drawings. So let's take a look at what we have here. At the top, it's telling you what version. It's telling you that this report is for exterior lighting. You have other options you can choose from, but this one is just for exterior lighting. And I'm going to scroll down just a little bit. It's telling you what code, 90.1/2004, the date, the file name and extension from where you grabbed it, and with that .cck extension. This has the project information. This is where I actually populated the construction site, the owner, the designer, and so forth. Anything that I want to show up, or anything special that I want to show in my report, you might want to add it in here. Now in Section 2, this is where you have your exterior lighting calculations. So with that, I have these columns. I have exterior area and surface. I have B, which is the quantity. C is the allowed watts per unit. Tradable wattage is in column D. Is it yes or no? Is it tradable? And then E is your allowed watts, and F is your proposed watts. So with that, we have the drive up, we have the main entrance, we have parking area and walkway. Now let's take a look at down here when I talk about that 5%. I have total tradable watts, 2,470. My proposed, 2,383. And then it takes in the allowed watts, which is 3,270. And then that supplemental wattage is that 5% that has an asterisk by it that is saying on this report the supplemental allowance equal to 5% of the total wattage may be applied toward compliance of both the non-tradable first and tradable area surfaces. And that's where it's taken in, this 5%, and it's showing you on this report. Down in Section 3 is your actual fixture schedule. This is where anything that I've put in there on the lighting grid and the COMcheck software is now has it displayed the same way on the report. And as you see down at the bottom, my exemption for the highlighting the public monuments, it'll show up that the defined fixtures, that middle halide's 50 watts, and over to the column E, it's showing that as exempt. And it's not calculating in those fixtures to the total proposed wattage, which was the 2,383. Down in Section 4 is the requirement checklist. This is where, okay, you've defined all your fixtures, you know what your allowed versus your proposed is, but now you have a section is, what Eric mentioned, you still have some mandatory requirements. And all those mandatory requirements will show up on this report under the requirement checklist. Your controls, your switching, your wiring, your efficacy. These are the things, and there's not a lot for exterior lighting. There's more for other, if you're doing envelope or interior lighting. So pay attention to the requirement checklist that you're still meeting all the mandatory requirements that are applicable. Down in Section 5 is your compliance statement. And this is kind of a new feature that we have in COMcheck. Right now on this compliance statement, it shows one signature line. Well, in the software, and I'm going to jump back to the software, I can actually customize my signature line. I can have more than one signature line if I want on these reports. Maybe I have 3 lighting designers, and I want them to all be able to sign this report for file or to submit to the building department. So with that, I'm through looking at the report, so I'm going to actually go back to the software and show you a feature on how you can customize these reports to, you know, if you wanted to have your actual company name each time on these reports, that you can do this in the software under Preferences. And I'm going to give it a second because I'm jumping back to that data file. I'm actually on the Exterior Lighting tab. And now I'm going to come over, I'm going to click on Project. And you'll see that in the project details, this is where I can enter my information, the address, and so forth. This is something that will change every time. This will be saved with your data file in the project details. But what I'm going to show you, this will actually open up and be a default every time you open up the actual software. So if I come up to File, or I come up to Edit, excuse me, and I go down to Preferences. Now anything I change or in here is going to be a permanent thing every time I open up this software. And this actually would have to do with General, Project, and Applicant, and Reports. In General, you can actually do some features as far as your file location that you want to have show up every time. There's a Beyond Code Advisor, which typically right now has a lot of envelope, nice information on envelope that will take you out and give you nice articles that are above code. In the project, I can actually, I want it to default that every time I want it to be this state, this location, and so forth, so you can make these features happen. In Applicant, I can actually put in, I don't want to type my name in every time. I want it to default. And keep in mind, this is only in Preferences. So if I change it in the project details, that's only for that data file. But if I put this in Preferences, then it's going to save it. And every time I open up this application, then the owner, agent, and designer will always be there. And maybe that's the way you'd like it. And you don't want to type it in every time. So that's another nice new feature. And under Reports, this is where I can actually add some more signature lines. I can customize my signature lines if I want to. And if I want to email my report directly to the building department, then I can do so from here is where it, actually in here is where you email it. But this is where I want to type in my email and the software save it. So I don't have to type in my email or the recipient because maybe I'm dealing with the same building department every time. I can default it so it'll save those in these preferences right here. Now up after you have a data file, I can actually save this data file. So I can hit save, and when I hit save or save as, it's going to save the actual data file. Another thing is, what if I want to save the report? Saving the report is different than the data file. Now it will save the report actually as a PDF, or if you want to, it will create an RTF extension, which makes it more applicable if you wanted to open up in another's Word application or Word, whatever it might be that you want to change it to, like a .txt file, where you can actually be more compatible to throw it into a CAD drawing if you wanted to. And again, when I went up to Save Report, it gives you options. Well, I didn't do anything with envelope or interior or mechanical. I'm going to click off those. I only want my exterior lighting report. I only want to save one for the exterior lighting. If I was clicked on these, it'll still give you a report, but it won't have anything in it. Another thing to mention with these reports is if I was failing compliance and I wasn't paying particular attention to my compliance before I went up and said, grab me my report, and then you looked at the report and you're like, well, where's my signature line? These reports, for any one of these, envelope, interior, exterior lighting, mechanical is optional. It's not a pass or fail. It's just you can customize your actual systems within that tab. It will not give you a signature line if you're failing. Each one of the systems in here is a standalone compliance. So exterior lighting on its own, if it's not complying and you pull up the report and you don't see the signature line, go back to your data file and take a look at your compliance results and see where you need to get that into compliance. Well, this pretty much ends the demo demonstration. And now I'm going to let Rose kick back in to, let me move it back over to the PowerPoint. Give me a second here. Sometimes this takes a little bit to move it back over here. Now I'm going to kick it back over to showing you the website for one, and then we're going to get into questions here in a minute. This is the Department of Energy's Building Energy Codes website, energycodes.gov. This is a screenshot of the home page, and there's other software applicable out there, but ones you want to look at on this home page where it says free software is that desktop version. Right now this is the only one that you can go grab, download it, and start using that exterior lighting feature. Other things to mention that's out on this website that might be helpful for you is we have a lot of training tools that are out there. We have PowerPoint presentations. This webcast will be available in a couple weeks. And we also offer credit for this recorded webcast for AIA members, and you can still print a certificate of completion by viewing that recorded webcast. We have case studies that are available. We have online training, some self-paced training tools that are nice. We have a new self-paced training tool right now that actually goes into how to run your takeoffs in COMcheck, envelope, and interior lighting. We're going to add exterior lighting to that. We have a nice resource center that's out on the home page where you can go pull some graphics. Maybe you're developing your own training presentation, or maybe you have a special thing that you want to try to go find an article. We have advanced design guidelines that are available out there that you might want to take a look at. And if you haven't registered for our Setting the Standard newsletter, go out and do so. Click on the link or use this link, the energycodes.gov news, and go register for this newsletter. This newsletter has really good information. We look at maybe things that are coming up, new code adoptions, things that are issues in the field. Really good article to go take and look at and register for. And again, if you have other things that you want to go out and look at as far as technical information, your resources, you could go to ASHRAE.org. You can get a formal interpretation from ASHRAE if you have a specific question that you want a formal interpretation. Go out to ASHRAE. They have technical support. IECC, International Code Council, they also have a website and can provide formal interpretations on the IECC. And IESNA has a website that you can go to. And again, of course, always go out to our website at energycodes.gov, DOE's Building Energy Codes program. We have a technical support as well, and we can answer questions on any of the codes. And definitely, if you have questions on the software, send us an email into our Help Desk online form or through the tech support email address at techsupport@becp.pnl.gov.
Well, thanks very much for an informative webcast, Eric and Pam. And thanks to all of you. The U.S. Department of Energy appreciates your attendance.